to do that first. Sorry about that. So anyway, but again, thank you for coming, and we're going to allow each one of the candidates to start with a 2-minute opening statement.
Okay,
Keith.
I'm going to stand. Hope that doesn't bother
That'd be
me.
fine.
I'm a wanderer. I apologize.
Well, just stay in front of the camera if you could. We're live on the internet right here.
Camera, got it. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll stand behind Alex. Just
Okay.
kidding. Can we turn me down a little bit? Yeah, good? Okay. Keith Spanarelli. Basically why I'm doing this, and here, not only, okay. We're good, fellas? Thanks, Alex. Take it.
Testing.
Shutting it off right now.
If you don't mind, just use this then. Yep.
There you go. Sure.
Is that better? Hello? Hello? Hello?
You have a cell phone on you? I got a cell phone with a airplane. Okay. Try.
Is that better? Hello? You don't hear me? Okay. Keith Spanarelli, we'll try this again. Keith Spanarelli, running for the United States Senate, obviously. Why I'm doing this and why it's important for me to do this is because I believe Washington has kind of forgotten all of you. And it's important that their loyalties seem to be, and our incumbents really seem to be, centralized only on the people that bankroll them. And I think that's kind of disgusting. It bothers me tremendously. And I believe that you guys have lost your representation. People are not listening to you. They're only listening to the special interest of lobbies and the PACs. And I think that's a real big problem. I have not accepted one dime of any of that money and refused anybody that had come at me with that. I believe it's important that the voters, the citizens, and the people of our state and our country need direct representation, need direct accountability to their office. One of my big things is public access for public office. Not only are we going to put a camera in the office to stream every meeting with every PAC, every lobbyist, every special interest, live catalog them so you can go and see them, but we're also going to bring technology into the voting center from any bill, whether it's my bill, sponsored bill, or any bill. We're going to put it up on the website, let you guys review it, comment on it, vote on it if you want. We believe it's important to bring it back to you. Sorry, Italian thing. Bring it back to you, very, very important. I also believe that we need to focus on pretty much some core things. Jobs, and we need to handle our financial cliff that is coming up. It doesn't seem to be anybody. Is that from Tom? Somebody buzz me? We good? No? Hello. All right, sorry about that. So financial, the cliff is coming, and we're not dealing with it. It's been going on too long. My philosophy in business is I've been a business owner for several years. You can either fix it or replace it. And I don't know how much longer we can wait to fix it. So it's time to replace it. Make sure representatives and senators have the responsibility of only to you. That's pretty much what I believe needs to be done, and I believe you guys deserve accountability. Am I getting my 2 minutes? I don't know. I got interrupted so many times.
Thank you for coming. My name is Alex Pires. I'm from a small town in New England. My parents never went to high school. I'm self-made. I am a lawyer from the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. That's where I was trained. I'm also a business person, and I have 8 businesses in Delaware. I also started a bank, so I'm a banker too. I'm a class action lawyer, which is a lawyer who represents groups of people. I am the single most successful class action lawyer for 4 people in the history of the country. I won 4 billion-dollar cases, not million-dollar cases, billion-dollar cases. Made a lot of money. I have invested all of it in Delaware, every penny of it, and now live in Delaware. I'm here to talk about Medicare and Medicaid, TRICARE, which is for the military, and Social Security. I have 2 healthcare cases myself that I'm doing that are both class action cases. I know quite a bit about Medicare. I've studied Obamacare versus Romney Care. I'm also from Massachusetts, so I knew a lot about it then. Most of my family's there. So when we have a question and answer period, I'd like to get into the specifics of Medicare, particularly for those people who have questions about where it's going. Medicaid for those people who might need it. TRICARE if you have people who are in the military or family members. And then most importantly, Social Security, which of course is the topic of the day. So my name is Alex. When you have a chance to ask questions, we'd like to answer them. We're going, all of us together, we're going from town to town, city to city in Delaware, and we're debating while we're waiting for the other debates. We think it's important. I think it's very important. It's what made the country great, going town to town. When you have 30 or 40 people at a time, to me that's as much as 1,000 people. So thank you.
Seems to have a functioning microphone, so I'll be booming away here. Thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Andrew Groff. I'm a born and raised Delawarean. I did have the absolute pleasure of living in New England for quite a while, traveling internationally with large companies like Nike and Strawberry Corporation and Fila. And I have my own business here in Delaware upon coming back to Delaware years ago. I have a computer business. So Delaware is blessed by 4 wonderful candidates here for Senate who are independent business people. And I think that's great. We need more people who have experienced the real world, as I'm sure Alex will get into a little later. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and all those things that we rely on as a society. There's a whole lot of other things going on in our economy and internationally right now that you may want some feedback on as well. So if you're concerned about what's going on in Europe, or if you're wondering if maybe we'll have a war with Iran or Syria, I'd be interested in multifaceted discussion on that as well. So there's a whole lot we can talk about, and there's a whole lot people are worried about. And Mr. Spanarelli said we're approaching a financial cliff. We're not approaching it anymore. We're on it, and we're about to fall over. So we can get into that a little more too. And I think you're going to find surprising agreement among very different ideologies here, having had another debate with at least a few of the folks on this panel. So I think Delaware is in a unique position of having 4 really good alternative candidates to select from. And based on our experience, based on our philosophies, and based on perhaps what you hear tonight, it will help you make that decision this November. So thank you for your attention. Please think of some really good, tough questions. I love tough questions. So, so try to stump the panel here. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Kevin Wade. It is a short name, and it's easy to remember Kevin Wade. I'm pleased to be joined by 3 other U.S. Senate candidates at this table tonight. I think they all, myself included, deserve a round of applause. Now, I notice in the back of the room that Senator Carper did send his tracker. Now, he's a man who takes a video of every word that I say, sometimes every word that Mr. Pyrus says, sometimes what Mr. Groff says. Spanarelli, same thing. Now, we welcome him here to take a recording of what transpasses this evening, but I think we all would like to see Senator Tom Carper be here on this panel as well. You see, Senator Carper went on the taxpayer payroll as an elected official over 35 years ago. To give you a timestamp on that, that's when the American Motors Gremlin was a hot seller in the new car showrooms, and Disco Inferno was in the top 40 of the pop charts. But a lot of water has passed under the bridge in those years. And even a mighty force as Tom Carper in his prime eventually runs to the sea and spends its energy. Now, our nation today is faced with historic problems. We'll be talking about Medicare tonight. We'll be talking about Social Security other nights. We'll be talking about defense. We're going to talk about the tough issues that need real solutions as we travel around the state. Now, I know that first and foremost in every mind is what do we do about jobs? Because until we get people back on the payroll, working and contributing to Social Security and contributing to Medicare, there will be no solution. We know the story of 50% of our college graduates not being able to find a job any different than they would have found coming out of high school. People losing their job and not getting one in 6 weeks or 6 months, but going years without finding other similar gainful employment. It's not that Senator Carper and those of his political views haven't created jobs. They have. They've created tens and tens of millions of jobs. Those jobs have been created in places like Shanghai and Mumbai, and not in Smyrna, and not in Del Mar. So we have to solve the jobs problem before we can solve the fiscal deficit problem, before we can solve the long-term structural deficit problem. Everything revolves around jobs. Now, I'm a small businessman. I started a business on my kitchen table 30 years ago. I did not know any better. If I knew what it was like, I wouldn't have done it. But I'm proud that I did it, and no, Mr. President Obama, I did build my business myself. And I, too, am a self-made man. And I'm content with the life that I and my wife Gail, would you please stand up? She's sitting right there. She's been with me on every difficult journey and a few sunny days over 35 years now. Two minutes and a wrap-up. Well, I gave the tracker so much time for Tom Carper to begin with. I'm not here for myself, and in fact, I'm not here for you. I'm here for our children and our grandchildren. We cannot be the first generation in the history of this country to turn over a broken, broke, and bankrupt nation to our children. And that's what I'll be talking about tonight. Thank you very much.
Questions? Who's got the first question?
Just come right up to the microphone. You can bring the microphone to you. Anybody have a question?
The question is regarding the $700 billion that Obama supposedly cut from, I'm sure he did cut from Medicare. I heard that in Ryan's new plan, that was not taken care of. Can you explain where the $700 billion is today, or what happened to it? Is it missing from Medicare, or is it still there? Or what?
Is it to anybody or
Look in your pocket.
Okay, I'll tackle it first. The 716 that you're referring to, that is the sound bite that's going around right now. Can you hear me? Okay. The 716 is actually a projection of cuts. It's a projection of fixing. It's a projection of scaling down Medicare. It's not gone. It's not pulled out of an account. It's the same thing, and both of them talk about it in different ways. So it's a scare tactic. I hate to call it as it is, but it is. And it's something that just sound bites of what the projected they believe they can cut by reducing red tape and fraud in Medicare. So it's not something that's been completely stolen. It's not like it's out of the account and transferred over. He believes if he saves that money in the ACA, it will be able to be used to fund the ACA. So pulling out of Medicare and the cutbacks to savings are projected. So it's a magical number, essentially, that it was come out of analysis, and that'll be used to fund ACA by saving so much money.
So it's not really missing from Medicare, then?
It's not been pulled out of an account, it's not been sucked out, it's not been, a check hasn't been written or transferred or anything to that effect. So it's a number that is projected for them to sell, say, look, we can do this by saving so much money, by cutting things back, by reducing fraud, and bring it over and it can pay for the ACA, which is the Obamacare, as we call it.
I'd like to add just one thing about it. I'm like you, like a lot of people, it's been in the news for about 2 weeks. On the Sunday New York Times, they did a whole column about it. They called it The Truth and Lies About Medicare. Both sides have exaggerated it. To address specifically what you asked, I think it's a question of how you count the dollars and you count the savings. I have to be really honest. The trust fund, which is really what it is, Medicare, isn't going to run out for at least 25 years. You know, like the Social Security they've been talking about, they talk about it running out. It's not going to run out. These two programs are the most important programs we have. Medicare works very, very well, and Social Security works very, very well. Don't forget, when Social Security started in the 30s, people made fun of it. They said it would never work. How would you keep track of it all? What if people cheated? I don't know if you remember. There was a long period of time when everybody said it would never work. Now Social Security not only works, everybody's computerized. You can get a yearly statement. If you're missing your check, there's a whole system that follows it. Medicare itself, although it's made fun of by both sides, and I'm trying to do this in a neutral way, Medicare works quite well, actually. And what Obamacare is doing and what Romney was doing was pretty much the same. I know the Republicans and Democrats here don't want to say that. There's not much difference between the two. And they're now all arguing over what you call the $716 million. It's not really going to hurt any senior, and it's not going to take, I don't believe, benefits from anyone. So if you're worried about it, I wouldn't worry about it any more than I'd worry about Social Security, other than if you're worried about the privatization issue, which I'm sure someone's going to ask about, and we'll talk about that. Hope that helps.
I'd like to address the issue on a broader scale. I think you're going to hear a lot of pandering. I think you're going to hear a lot of talking points, a lot of little snippets coming out. This is a shell game. Social Security, Medicare, you've paid for. That's why it's called an entitlement, because you're entitled to the benefits that you paid. However, when you look at monetary policy, when you look at what this Treasury is doing and what the Federal Reserve is doing, these dollars and cents that they're bandying about, $716 billion, whatever it is today, it will be something different next year and the year after and the year after. And you may say, how can that be? We put this money aside. It's in a lockbox. I think that was an expression used a couple years ago. And that's all an illusion. And I'm going to say things economically because I think I might be the only actual educated economist here. That when you understand how the Federal Reserve and the Treasury work together in our money supply, these numbers are as arbitrary as most people's selection for dinner. They change every day, depending on the mood, and depending on what they want you to know. So these financial matters in government, when they're banding this about, is to create this emotional tension within you that is to divide you, right or left, between Republican and Democrat. And you're given two choices to a question that doesn't even exist. Because this stuff is arbitrary and it's illusory. It's depending on what they want to do with the money supply. How many foreign governments they want to bail out, what interest rates they're willing to offer. And now the interest rate nationally is, for large financial institutions, effectively zero. So when the interest rate is effectively zero, your money is effectively worthless. So we have larger problems than this. Social Security, Medicare, these institutions are vitally important, particularly to the present generation of seniors and the baby boomers coming up now, as their 401ks, which they were sold that Ponzi scheme back in the 80s and 90s, are now nearly worthless for many people who don't have the financial acumen to truly manage them themselves. And now we're talking about privatizing other parts of our entitlement system for millions upon millions of Americans who don't have the financial resources or the training or the knowledge or the ability to access that kind of consultation to make those decisions. Americans aren't dumb people. They're just not experts in every single thing. They're quite talented and quite creative people, and we'll get out of this hole, but not by accepting the smoke and mirrors that is being passed along in our two parties about this issue. Because those numbers they're bandying about can be changed instantly with monetary policy. And you're seeing it every day. For those trying to fill up their car with gas, for those looking at their cereal boxes shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. Obviously something's going on in our monetary system. So open up your eyes to the shell game that's going on and don't be distracted by a $716 billion thing here when the real problem is tens and hundreds of trillions of dollars that is being passed about this planet now in financial instruments that could blow up any second. So look at the real issues and understand what's really going on, because this fall season, you are going to be thrown a lot of smoke and mirrors in your way. And I will probably not win this Senate race. I don't have a lot of money, and I won't have a lot of media exposure. But the one opportunity I do have, and thanks to these men cooperating, us all cooperating together, you're going to see a lot of different points of view. And that's the kind of point of view you're going to get from me. A small business person, born and raised in the state, so I understand the Delaware way. Don't like it, but that's where we are. And I want to be able to get the truth out. And even the news media, like the vaunted New York Times, is not immune to smoke and mirrors. Thank you.
Medicare was created by an act of Congress in 1965 and signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. It has been funded by all of us for all these years. I remember my very first part-time job as a high school kid. There was a little bit of a deduction that came out for Medicare. This applies to all of you. Real money was taken out of your pay envelopes to put into, as we were told, a trust to be there for us when we came to our time of need at the age of retirement. Like so many of the trusts that were created originally with every good intent, money flowed in, but through the years, starting under frankly a Republican president, maybe 1969, they began to use the money out of the trust for the general purposes of the federal government. Now, to keep the bookkeeping correct, they would put an IOU back into that box to say we've taken this money out, but we'll replace it later. Well, there are now $5 trillion, that's with a T, $5 trillion in IOUs. Now, if it were an IOU signed by Mr. Groff or Mr. Pyrus or Mr. Spanarelli, I think we'd have a pretty good chance of having it made right. But this is an IOU signed by the United States Congress. The same ones who took a post office created by Ben Franklin and found a way to get that log jammed. Now, many of you will agree if I say that if the federal government took control of the Sahara Desert today, within 5 years, we would have a shortage of sand. I believe that $700 billion has been pulled out of the projected spending for Medicare and put into what's called Obamacare, which is, in fact, we now know, constitutional. Now, my lovely bride, before I married her, she had a 1973 Ford Pinto. That car was also constitutional, but it wasn't very good. And the same thing with Obamacare. And when they begin to move IOUs around in order to pay for new programs without demonstrating an understanding of what changes need to be made in the existing programs to make them sustainable over the horizon, far into the future, then we are willfully ignoring the facts. And I'm getting the sign of too much time again, and I'll respect that hand signal. We'll talk more as the evening goes on. Thank you.
I would ask the panel to please give a comment on whether the Federal Reserve should be audited.
Yes. If I may add, because we're talking about debt, and we're talking about what we owe. What's this? This is a Federal Reserve note. It's a debt. It's a debt that you all owe to a banking cabal. Okay? There's no intrinsic value in this. In the early 60s, John Kennedy tried to issue Treasury notes, just like your change, your pocket change, is issued by the Treasury. There's no debt involved. We don't owe any group anything for the change in our pockets. But every time we use a Federal Reserve note, we owe an interest. We owe interest and our taxes to a non-governmental cabal organization that is not under the purview or review of the United States government. They can do whatever they want. They don't mind loaning your tax dollars to foreign countries to bail out Deutsche Bank, to bail out banks in Spain, to bail out banks anywhere in the world with your tax dollars. And how do they do it? Right here, Federal Reserve notes. So the lady asked an extraordinarily important question and may not have realized it. Thank you.
The Federal Reserve was established in 1913 as the bank of the last resort. If there were a short-term panic where people went to their neighborhood bank and said, I want everything out now, and it happened across the nation, the entire economy would collapse for a lack of, well, cash to be available on payday to cover payroll, or money to be borrowed to expand a solid business. So it was created to be the bank of the last resort, provide liquidity to balance out irrational supply-demand disruptions. Now, through the years, it's grown to be something else. Its present charter, its mission is to ensure the value of the dollar, to maintain the value of the dollar, and to ensure full employment. Well, like so many institutions that have been framed by Washington, it fails to meet the mission. It clearly needs to be audited. There is too much that happens in darkness there. See, the currency that we use is the measure of all the work we have done in our life. And when that gets debased, and when it can be manipulated, and when hands move in the darkness behind the scenes, and billions of dollars flow out of this country without much documentation or reconciliation as to the reason, as in $3 billion going to New Zealand in 2009, I don't know if it's returned, we have a right to audit the Fed. We may have to redesign the Fed because it hasn't met its purpose. Now, the Fed did not prevent the collapse of the financial sector in the early days of the Depression in the 1930s. And the Fed did nothing to prevent the occurrence of a collapse in the real estate market in 2008 and 2009. So, has it met its mission? If it hasn't, we need to do the audit, and if need be, we need to completely redesign it. Thank you very much.
I have a very small bank. I started it 6 years ago. We're now $135 million bank, so we're one of the smallest in the state. We're very small. But in watching what's happened in banking, I've noticed two things. As a country, we made two really huge mistakes. Starting in the 30s, we had a law called Glass-Steagall. And what it did was it prevented in our country banks from being on both sides of banking. You could be a commercial banker, meaning lending money and taking money, or you could be an investment banker, but you couldn't be both. They didn't want you to pool one pile of money with the other. It went on from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and 70s. It went very well, and we had very few scandals. We had a healthy economy. I don't want to tell you who to blame or which party to blame for the change, but put it this way, the law changed, and Glass-Steagall was dropped, and we allowed our bigger banks, all of our banks, to merge and do both sides, commercial banking, investment banking. The biggest mistake in 100 years in this country. You saw what happened. You saw what happened. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars were lost. For those of you in the room who had investments in the stock market, you took a beating from that. If you invested in real estate, you took a beating from that. If you just were a small and medium-sized business, we all lost money. The worth of our country plummeted as a result of it. And what happened? They were all in danger of going under. Who did they turn to? Citigroup, JP Morgan, Bank of America, three of the big five, wanted bailouts. They got bailouts of between $45 billion and $75 billion from you. You bailed out the banks to help them recover from what I call the national cheating scandal. What they did was they took the investment money and the commercial money and they speculated with it. You bailed them out. You got no credit for it at all. The citizens of our country got no credit for it. And now that they're back on their feet, they're treating us with abuse like they did before. So when people say I'm against big banks, that's why. I'm a very small bank. We just make modest loans to people in Delaware. We don't lend money to people in Maryland or Virginia or anywhere else. And we don't get involved with the investment side. We're just a small commercial bank, and we made about $100 million of the loans to everyday people. I'm not here to brag about that. I'm here to say that there is a way of doing it. We should go back to a simpler system, and that might help, ma'am, on the bigger picture, too. Thank you.
All great points. All great points. One point that we all kind of missed, why the Federal Reserve was created, because we didn't want Congress managing our money. Very simple. All good points, all those things, but that's what they knew. Congress knew they couldn't do it. So let's do it. A separate entity, put it together. Any entity should be audited, should be checked by the people, and done. So I agree wholeheartedly. We need to find out what's going on. There's no doubt it. I believe Kevin said darkness. Yeah, that's a scary part of any of the government. I think it should be brought to light. I truly, truly do. The biggest things on Alex's point here with the law change, it's supposed to come back. We have a 2-year moratorium coming back for this law. So for the investment banking and the, I call retail banking, excuse me, prevent that. Chase just had a big hit. I don't think we've even heard the final number on that. Last I heard was like 6.5. It's climbing. That just happened for the law that's supposed to come in place in 1.5 years. My challenger, September 11th, was the one who stalled that for 2 years. Make sure you get that for me. I want to make sure everybody knows that, especially his tracker back there. He's the one who delayed that for 2 years. So that wouldn't come into place. Wouldn't go back to, you cannot do the same thing. Jamie Dimon, CEO of Chase, said, hey, if that law was in place, we wouldn't have had this problem. Banks should invest in themselves, as Alex said and brought it up. It solves a lot of problems. We're going back there, but unfortunately, like everything else we do in Washington, we drag our feet because of our special interests tell us to do that and that stuff. And that's where we should stand up and say, But our own Delaware senator was the one who prevented that and could have locked it down, but he lobbied real hard on getting a 2-year moratorium on that one, and he got it. So now we're paying the price, and we're exposed for, I don't know the exact math, but a year, little plus. So the Federal Reserve, back to your point, yeah, everything should be checked. And we should look at it. If we need to adjust it, we need to be adults about it and adjust it. It's just that simple.
Could I add something? I think we should have about a 15-second moment of silence to recognize the fact that Senator Carper is not here to answer these questions.
15, what about 35 seconds?
That's Carper's answer. Next question.
Get it.
Oh, sorry. I want to take it back to Medicare. I have a question. Why is it that when you turn 65, you have to take Medicare? And if you do not take it, you are penalized, and that penalty you pay for the rest of your life. And with now, they're trying to get people to work longer to get their Social Security. They're working, they have medical insurance at work. Why are they forced to drop that and take Medicare?
What do you have now? Do you have private insurance, dear?
No, that happened to us. My husband has a business. When he turned 65, the government forced our insurance company to drop us because he was eligible for Medicare and I lost my insurance and I'm high risk. So now we are both on Medicare, but I am curious as to why you are forced to take it at 65, and if you don't take it, you are penalized, and that penalty premium continues, and you pay that for the rest of your life.
I'm just trying to understand it. He was out. You wanted Medicare. You were enrolled. You didn't want it either.
No, we wanted to keep our own private insurance because I'm high risk, and I lost my insurance when they forced him to go on Medicare.
And now you're back. Now you're on Medicare, and are they picking up your problem, your disability, dear?
Yes.
Okay.
But at that interim time, we didn't have a choice. And I'm curious as to why you're forced to take Medicare at 65.
Well, it is a combination of collusion between government agencies and private insurance agencies. And needless to say, the private insurance agencies, as we all age, are less, shall we say, incentivized to cover us. So the moment that they can drop us, they do, in favor of governments. They're businesses. They're profit-making businesses. So.
We were paying a premium, and X amount of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Medicare They weren't covered by Medicare.
Right.
So we're getting worse coverage by switching to Medicare.
Yes.
Even though I was born in a state, I didn't want Medicare.
Right. You could have bought gap insurance for yourself, but again, they're splitting you because you're in a group policy.
I have 7 policies now. It's crazy.
You have what now? I'm sorry.
Separate.
7 policies.
7 policies
Yes, sir.
to counteract the 1 policy we had before. And when I called Medicare to question it, they told us that was the law. That when you turn 65, you have to take Medicare. You have no
When you
choice.
turn 65, you have to make a choice.
No, we were
Well,
told that
you-
we had to take Medicare. We had no choice.
Well, the choice is the penalty. The choice is the penalty.
You could have. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead. The choice was the penalty. I'm sorry. The choice was the penalty, and it's not really a choice because you're getting penalized. You're absolutely right. To answer your question, why? I don't know if any of us could answer when Medicare was written why that was done, but they believed it was for the best at that time. And we're talking about not just Medicare, but we're talking about healthcare reform, and that's where we need to come because, as I believe Andrew mentioned, the giants, the private companies are taking over, and they know that once you hit that mark, they'd rather be out of it, and they're happy to prevent that law from being adjusted and changed and fixed. Because you should have a choice. We're in America, for God's sakes. We should have that choice to do it. But if you need it, it should be there, but you shouldn't be penalized for it. I agree with you, and I think that's something that needs to be revisited and reformed. But their answer to you is, yes, you have a choice. You can just pay for that choice. And the 7 policies, I sat on a couple of those, and you need a degree just to understand them all. I understand what the plans, and it's mind-boggling. Right, because it's a mandate. At 65, you take it or penalty. Just that simple. Because that's the way the law was written back, and I couldn't tell you why, because I went around and nobody was in the room when they decided that was the best for society at the time. That's the problem with these programs. Short-term solutions turn into long-term solutions with no exit plan and no adjustment going through because nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about Social Security, Medicare. Nobody wants to talk about this stuff because it's political suicide. Because they're all worried about re-election. And unfortunately, we need to deal with it because it's coming up and it's hitting us right in the face. 7 is disgusting. I'm sorry, I don't mean disgusting that you're getting protection, but I think 7 is disgusting. You shouldn't have to manage that many policies to be able to handle things in your golden years, my opinion.
No, I was just going to say one thing, and we're not helping you as much as we should be, and I apologize. Try looking at it this way. It's a pool for everybody age 65 and over. It's really a pool. And you are being asked, do you want to be penalized to stay in what you think is a better program? Because you had your own company, I assume you were both on it. Yours was probably better for you.
Yes.
You have to pay that penalty. Otherwise, they want you in the pool. They want everybody in the pool. It's a very, very awkward system, and it does need reform. I don't disagree. But you're 100% correct. You probably would have been penalized if you didn't join the pool, because they're trying to get everybody in the pool, 65 and over. That's the simple, honest answer. There's no sense in prettying it
Well,
up.
you got mental visits in D.C. telling you about the Medicare problem. They don't know what ends up, and I was perfectly willing to go ahead the other way.
Yes.
Try to
You should have that choice.
Yes.
You sure need one syllable words, though. I'm being sarcastic, though.
No, I understand. Can I give you an analogy? If you're in the military and you're active duty, you're eligible for TRICARE. If you did your 20 years and you leave, you and your family are eligible for TRICARE. If you're in the military and you're abroad, your children here are eligible for TRICARE. TRICARE is a fantastic program. It allows you to have a little card, you can go around, it's perfect insurance. But everybody else is involved in the military, they don't get it. They get the VA. And I don't know if there's any vets here or anybody who, I don't want to criticize. I know a little bit too much about it. The VA system compared to the TRICARE system is light and darkness. It's 2 different worlds. It's extremely unfair, exactly like the way you're explaining. I've been yelling and saying, these are our people. These are our military people who wear the uniform. Why are you splitting them up? They say the only way they can make the numbers work is to have 2 different pools. The TRICARE pool was $42 billion last year, $42 billion. They want to spend less on it. Then all the VA folks, there's a whole different pool for them. So much like what you're saying, the system is at times unbelievably unfair. I'm not trying to make you feel any better. I'm just saying
I'm with you 100%, and I'm sorry I can't solve that for you, but I also face it in the military world. It's an extremely unfair system. I have people that I know who've been waiting 2 and 3 and 4 years for their claim to be processed through the VA, and they're going right out of their minds with anger, frustration towards their country, not us, not anybody in particular here. But the system doesn't work very well if you're not in the TRICARE system. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do, and I apologize to you. Sorry.
So let's get this straight. You had paid into Medicare, both of you, all those years. And you got to 65 and you said, I don't want it. I already have mine. I'll pay for mine. And Washington said, no, you can't. We'll punish you if you don't become an expense to Medicare. This is something that can only happen in Washington. You understand this? See, do we really want the same people making decisions with Obamacare? If the VA can't process a claim in 2 and 3 years for our veterans, we want the same mindset and the same bureaucracy to be involved in the intimate details of health care for every single person in America. No, we don't say that's the rule. We have to do it. Someone designed it. We have to do that. No, see, we are free citizens. It's a proper role for the federal government to provide a safety net, but not a series of traps and snares. They've lost their way. We have to show them a new way. That's why we have elections. There's a fundamental choice coming up in November this year. Larger government, more bureaucracy, more entanglements, or a direction that says, if you don't want to take the Medicare, don't take it until later, until you're ready. Keep working. Lord knows we need as many people working and going back to work as we possibly can. My friends, we have a nation that needs to be rebuilt. Don't punish people who continue to work and provide for their own health care at the age of 65. Sorry, Keith.
Next question.
The question? David.
Yes, just a comment on what Mr. Wade just said. If we had single-payer health care, their problems would be solved, and all this stuff about 7 insurance businesses wouldn't be involved. Well, that's my opinion. But at any rate, my question is, when we go on farther into the campaign season, there are going to be larger and larger forums. And we know that most of the forums have rules about who can participate and who can't. And they're so restrictive that they basically boil it down to the Democratic and Republican candidates. So my question is to the Democratic and Republican candidates. Will you support the idea of anybody that is ballot qualified candidate should be included in those future forums, which are going to be much larger than this one, and that you will refuse to participate if they are not included?
I'll take this one first, all right? Yes in your first part, and no, because I think it's an injustice not to do it. I think a protest is a great idea, but I think people need to be heard, and I think we need to change those rules. But yes, I would love everybody who's ballot qualified to be in a debate or in a forum.
Can I give my opinion? Because I'm kind of in between. I'm an independent, but I went out and got 9,000 signatures with the idea that I would get on the ballot independently, and then I picked the independent party. These debates are now being announced. There's a couple in October that are really important, and I just found out when they sent out the rules that this particular gentleman may not be qualified, and there are others. Myself personally, I can qualify because I'm wealthy. I had a poll done, and that's one of the requirements, which makes no sense. But I had a poll done, and I came out better than 10%. But that's not the point. The point is it is unfair. And I'll give you 2 examples that I think are more traditional American
experience. You all watched the Republican debates. They were on television for months and months. They had 8 candidates when they started, if you remember. Nobody complained. There were 8 of them, 9 of them at one time. There were 8, and then there were 7, and then there were 6, and it went on for months. I didn't see anybody around the country saying that that wasn't unfair. Everybody liked meeting all those candidates, and I think the country was better for it, and the Republicans got down to 1. Here we are in Delaware, one of the smallest states. There's the 4 of us, and there's Mr. Carper. There's only 5, and people don't want him to run. They'd like to avoid me running, and I think it's extremely un-American, to be perfectly honest with you. I'd like to say one other thing. Mr. Carper, who's, as you all know, I'm not a big fan of his, he has spent his entire life as a professional politician, and as the joke goes, I always say, what's the profession? You know, it's somebody who says yea and nay. He doesn't want competition, I understand that. He doesn't want debates. But I'm going to give you a little bit of history. When he ran against Senator Roth, he was a very popular man, very famous United States senator, had a terrific reputation throughout the United States and the world, was considered to be a class act in the mold of Senator Williams from Millsboro, who was considered the classiest senator that ever came out of Delaware, was considered the conscience of the Senate. Roth was a good man. He was hounded by Senator Carper for debates. And Senator Carper made the big speech, the Delaware way was 20 debates. Interesting, Mr. Carper's not from Delaware, he's from West Virginia, but that was his speech. He hounded Roth. Now that the tables are turned, and we all want to debate him, of course, he won't come to any of the debates. So I feel like the rules here for the upcoming debates are dishonest. I won't say they're corrupt, but there's nothing special about the Republicans or the Democrats. It's just a party. And as a matter of fact, there are almost as many independents in Delaware as there are Republicans, and they don't have a voice at all. So I support what you're saying. I know to some people it may be unpopular, but this country does better when we have open doors and we let everybody compete. That's what made us so great. We take everybody else's people. If you think about how our system really works, we go to the whole world and we say, you want to come here? If you can qualify and help us a little bit, you know, come here. We take everybody. We took the weak and the meek and the poor and the beaten and the abused and the ignored. That's what made the country great. So why we would have debates where we wouldn't let everybody, to me, is wrong. So.
I think Senator Carper's opinion about open debates is shown by the seat that's not here tonight. I'd welcome a debate forum with all of these candidates. We have so many problems, and let's not short ourselves on the possible solutions that we could hear about. The idea that the Republican Party is the font of all wisdom is kind of foolish, and I am the Republican candidate. I'm quite proud of that, but I would not leave my business and my good family to walk around the state talking about the virtues of the Republican Party, and I can't possibly do it for today's Democrat Party. I can tell you a lot about John Kennedy, tell you a lot about Harry Truman and some others, but today's Democrat Party I do not understand. The idea that only those two parties could be represented to offer up solutions to the manifold, the very many problems we have is foolish. Mr. Groff might have the one idea that we need. Mr. Spanarelli could have 2 ideas that are essential. This is a small state. Tom, he's here. I sometimes, in somewhat good jest and maybe not good jest, I call Senator Carper Silent Tom because when the great issues face the country, he always seems to be silent. My particular beef is that we are a small state on a coastal plain in the mid-Atlantic region. And although our United States Constitution, is there anyone here who's read the Constitution? Okay. Although our U.S. Constitution indicates that the first state has 2 senators, just the same as every other state, it seems that Mr. Carper, about 92% of the time, votes the way Nevada votes. My reading is Nevada doesn't get 3 senatorial votes, and we get 1. We each get 2. And Tom Carper too often is silent, and it's hard to find out where he is his own man, let alone our independent voice. So maybe the silent seat to my right is a pretty good reflection of who we have in Washington today.
I think Kevin brings up a great point. As I said, I'm on a real low-budget party. I think I've got a couple things to say. I've had the experience in international business. I've literally had offices all over this planet, from Australia to Singapore to Hong Kong to Amsterdam and Florence, Italy. I've worked with businesses all over this planet. I've worked in 4 factories in New England, in shoe factories and other factories, and helping working people advance themselves and to create competitiveness among American workers. So I have a couple things to say. I have a point of view that I think is unique, and I'm not unrealistic about my prospects, but I will say this. I represent 2 very growing parties in this country in this particular election. I've been endorsed by the Libertarian Party of this state as well as the Green Party. So I'm not just speaking for one group of people, I'm speaking for many groups of people. And our voices in Washington are important at the senatorial level. We have that 1% of the Senate ability to affect policy. And right now, we've just had this dichotomy, this right-left or conservative and liberal or progressive versus I don't know what. And I think we're too easily divided as a country when we're not focusing on specific issues. And as Keith is saying, and Kevin is saying, we all need to put our ideas in, and we all need to be heard. And it doesn't do any harm, and it's highly manageable. We have an unstructured forum right here, right now, with 4 candidates that's working wonderfully. And I just wonder what's in these men's minds, particularly our incumbent candidates who are actually on the head of the board that's organizing these forums at the university. I wonder what they're afraid of.
I wonder if we could get off the subject that we're on right now.
I'm sorry?
Get off the subject that we're on right now and go to something different.
Please.
If you were elected and you go down to Washington, we have a big problem with the Postal Service, and which is taking a lot of money. They're in debt. What are some of the ideas you, in order to keep this Postal Service going, or privatize it, whichever way you want to go? Give us some ideas of how you would reorganize this outfit and at least save us some money as taxpayers.
Well, I think there's a misconception in the public that's been created about the role of the U.S. Postal Service. We're in the middle of a paradigm shift in communications in this country where most communications are happening electronically. However, there's a very large portion of the government that depends on a dedicated communication system as the post office for people to get their checks, for government to send out information to the public. They've been trying for years upon years to computerize and sanitize and send out that information electronically. And there are a lot of people that either don't have access to electronic communication resources, can't use it, that would disenfranchise. Our postal system is vital. I'm not here to demonstrate and say it's the most efficient thing on the planet. And I think there are creative ways to address that issue while not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I think it's been interesting lately that people like Tom Carper and Mr. Carney and Mr. Coons have been patting themselves on the back for maintaining some U.S. Postal Service depots in Delaware, which is great for Delaware employment, while sacrificing those across our elusive border into the Eastern Shore. So they're kind of playing a shell game with us as well as to who we open and who we close, and playing politics with people's lives again. So I feel that the Postal Service is something that we, for the foreseeable future, still require. I don't think that there's not room for improvement. I think there's probably a lot of room for improvement. But as any large organization such as them, look at General Motors, look at any large, even private organization that's trying to right their ship or to change directions. It does take some time, and it takes some very courageous leadership to do that.
I'd like to address it. Can you hear me without the microphone? Interestingly, on this very question that you asked, the Dover Post sent us all the same question and asked us how we felt. And I just by coincidence got a copy of it today because I wanted to see how everybody responded. I only knew my own answer. But they asked us to give the 3 things we would do to improve the Postal Service. To give you an idea of how much money they lose, the last 3 months they lost $5 billion. But many people think that's undercounted. Many people think they're losing $8, $9, $10 billion every 3 months. They're going to lose $20, $30 billion in the coming year. The person who's responsible for it is Tom Carper. He's been, in effect, the head of it on the Senate side for quite some time. He made recommendations in 2006 that were horrible, and it's, you know, he's not a business person, never has one. Tom Carper's never worked a day in his life, and for the gentleman back here who's taking the recording for Tom to watch tomorrow when he's eating his bonbons, Tom is the worst businessman in the history of civilization. And the reason is he's never worked a day in his life. He's never worked a day in his life. Never worked a day in his life. He has been living off of you since his 20s. So why you would give a person like that a business to run, I'm blaming you for that. You elected him. You people from Delaware, you elected this person. Number 2, the only other thing he's ever run is Amtrak, which is the 2nd biggest loser in the history of the country. They compete. The Postal Service and Amtrak are neck and neck as all-time losers of American money, and he's been involved with both of them. So this is what I said officially in the paper. How to save money? Eliminate Saturday delivery. The Postal Commission has been recommending that for years. Copper always avoids it. How much would we save? $3 to $5 billion a year. 2, let's be more efficient by installing cluster boxes. The studies show that if instead of going to every single house, you go to a neighborhood and you have to walk a few feet to get it, we can save billions of dollars. We are not lazy people. They don't have to go to your individual home, right? They can put it on the end of your street, you know, and we can save billions. And 3, this is what I wrote, and I mean it. Tom Copper has been head of the Senate committee that oversees the Postal Service since 2006. He is principally responsible for the billions and billions of dollars the USPS has lost. Fire Tom Copper and replace him with a business person. And that's my answer.
Yeah, let me stand up. I think better standing up. I'm an engineer. I've worked on projects around the world, and they really don't give you chairs and tables to sit at. You go to the job site, and all your work and all your thinking is on your feet. So I tend to think better when I'm moving around. Also, I'm a moving target. Imagine, if you will, the crank phones of 100 years ago. You know, 2-piece phone, you turn the crank to generate a signal voltage that someone heard a bell ringing about 2 miles away, and they picked it up and tried to make phone connections. That is, in some ways, the structure of the post office. Now imagine that a phone company that has crank phones is suddenly cast into the 21st century where they have to somehow make that work to compete with smartphones, to give you maps and can record voice messages and will share the news from Wall Street with you and the latest dismal, disappointing votes of Tom Carper, all in real time. How would the crank phone compete against the smartphone if it were abruptly thrown into the ring? Well, for too long, the Postal Service has been unable to make the thousands of small, gradual, evolutionary changes, primarily because of the bad hands of Washington. There are people in the Postal Service who know and have known what needed to be done. There's always some resistance to change within any organization, but in order to survive and adapt and provide a service, changes needed to occur, and they weren't allowed to occur in the way that circumstances required. So now we're faced with billions and billions of dollars of losses recurring for a service that in fact is constitutionally mandated. Post office is named in the United States Constitution. We have to have one. I had the opportunity to speak with a longtime postal worker. And these folks work hard. Rural delivery drivers are timed. They do time studies. They have to perform. They do work hard. But they work hard within a system that isn't efficient and isn't effective. Now, this gentleman, he has a family to raise. He has bills to pay. He has a mortgage he has to keep up with. And to be suddenly cast out onto the street with no ability to change from being a crank phone to a smartphone is a tough thing for him to deal with. There is no easy answer. I sent my own good answers into the Dover Post, and maybe some papers publish those. But we have to understand that the leadership of Tom Carper provided this as a significant part of the present problem. Tom Carper said that perhaps a significant part of the solution to the Postal Service would be to build, now listen to me carefully, friends, offshore wind turbines that would recharge electrically powered delivery vans. Now, yes, electrically powered delivery. Now, do you understand the anxiety and panic that the postal workers feel? Now, when we have decision makers like this, people have no business experience in Washington, trying to guide Medicare, forcing you to claim benefits when you don't want them, borrowing 40 cents on every dollar the federal government spends, trying to redesign our entire health care system, and apply smart power internationally around the world. You understand how we got to where we are today. We cannot look to the professional politicians in Washington to solve our problems. It's we the people. You know the preamble of the Constitution? We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. We have to take our country and our lives back on November 6th. Thank you very much.
Great question. You hit, Alex kind of hit the second one. I'm gonna triple your bag, Alex. Sorry. I just want to see the gentleman. You hit the fat cat, Politico fat cat, which is not controlled by anybody but ourselves. It's a government organization that tries to be independent, but it's controlled by the political machine. And the problem with this is Amtrak and the U.S. Post Office is when it comes down to real decisions, because there is no lobbyist, there is nobody that they have to be in bed with that's going to send them money, they have to make a decision based on either the country or their image. And it's all image-based. So let me save Delaware. Let me do this. No offense to Delaware Postal. I've met them. I've talked to them just like Kevin has. I've sat down with them. I had a lunch with them not too long ago, and they are hard-working people. But you've got a problem, just like we talked about. It's going electronic. It's not going there tomorrow. We are growing there. We're getting there. We need to make decisions that affect America, not just the state. I think one of the problems that we have with our senators and our representatives is they always focus on the state. And that's why there's two houses. The Senate should be government-based. It should be federal-based. The representatives are for representing each little district, or in our situation, the state, and affecting those things. And we cross over because we want that image. We want to look good, so when we go to re-elect, we can say, sir, my name is Tom Carper, and I save the United States Post Office. That's what they want to say. What I'd rather say to you is, my name is Keith Spanarelli, and I truly saved the United States Post Office. But you know what? We had to make changes in Delaware. And I apologize for the people in Delaware and the workers in Delaware, but I had to save the post office. And we need to make tough decisions and not worry about the baggage or re-election. And that's the reality of it, including Amtrak and those things that are government-based.
Thank you. Well, Since you brought up Alex brought up Amtrak, I detect a negative attitude towards Amtrak. We are one of the few countries, industrialized countries, that does not have an efficient railroad system with high-speed lines. We are one of the few countries that is an advanced industrial country that is stupid enough not to spend our money on infrastructure and things that will help us economically and socially down the line. Unfortunately, instead, we spend our treasure supporting our 900-plus military bases overseas. And I'm not making that up. So when I hear you say, hey, Amtrak's losing money. Well, we're supposed to spend money. We need a railroad system in this country, and the one we've got is being starved. And that's where we need to put our resources into our infrastructure. And I'd like to hear some response to that idea.
Thank you. Let's start at the top. In Japan, I've been to Japan, they have a great bullet system, and it's very organized and it works. In China, they have a very good system and it's getting better all the time. So I would agree with you, we need a system that delivers. If Mr. Copper is so powerful, right? You heard this latest announcement, they're talking about the bullet train. Guess who didn't get it? Delaware didn't get it. So if his influence is so great with Nevada, look, I'll try to be as polite as I can. I think Mr. Copper is universally considered to be a lightweight. He has no power in Washington, D.C. He's a step-and-fetch-it boy for Mr. Reed. He prides himself in being the deputy assistant whip or whatever it is. If he's so influential, why doesn't he have a speaking role in the upcoming convention? Think about that. I think we have the wrong person involved. Copper should not be involved with any of these industries because he has no competence whatsoever. So let's go back to the top, to your point. Do we need a modernized, effective, and efficient system that can carry people around? Absolutely, positively. For a country of our size, our system is absurd. But I agree with Kevin. Don't send a boy to do a man's job. And that's what he is. He's an incompetent business person who's never been in business. So my feeling about him is when they break up these issues, I say, why would you pick him? Why would you pick a person who has no interest in the bigger issue, which is we need what you're talking about. We need a real system. It works much better, for example, in the Midwest. Now, if you've spent any time in the Chicago area, their system works better, and they can improve upon it, and they've done it with very little government assistance. So we can do it. We can have a much better system. But do I agree with you? I do. But you see our Amtrak system now. Do you think it works well? Really? Honestly? Do you think it works well, sir? Right. Do you think the government should be running it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what runs them all over the world.
Well, that's not true. But your feeling is you'd rather have the government run the train system, if you will, bullet system and all. Well, let's just find out, because that's interesting. Do most people here feel that way? Let's learn from ourselves. Do most people? Yes, sir.
I feel the government should run a national rail system.
All right,
I've been in England. I've been in Germany.
Yeah.
I've been in Switzerland.
English,
Austria. I've been in all those.
I'll give you the English system. It's horrible. But
yes, for sure.
Yeah, let's learn from each other. How many people feel the government should be running the train system? Let's try it. Let's see. Yeah, 1, 2. No, I'm just trying to learn. Well, because if they felt the way he felt, then let's educate the people who are running. I disagree, but I want to know whether or not he's the majority, the minority. That's why we're here. Well, he deserves the attention of all of us. That's why we're here.
Maybe instead of
well, you want to ask it differently? Yeah,
I
think it's important. I think it's important that he give his argument. I disagree only because I think the private sector can do a better job. No.
A better job with the Postal Service, right?
All right, let's try it.
The trucking system in our country is an enormous machine, and it works extremely well. And the government doesn't have its finger in there at all, except for on the safety issue, one little part. And that they screw up. So don't tell me we can't transport. Our shipping system works unbelievably well, and the government is not involved. They're not involved at all, except for there's a small subsidy in it. I'm just saying we have a lot of good transportation systems in this country that are not government-based. So I just disagree. But go ahead.
Yeah, let me weigh in on this a little bit. Yeah, we haven't been through this conversation. I'll get back to you, Bernie, on this. We actually do have quite a highly profitable and highly efficient and highly computerized and actually an amazing system for rail deliveries in this country that most people don't spend any time looking at. The private freight systems in this country, and I've dealt with them for 30 years, are amazing. Most of the products that we get that are imported from Asia, as soon as they hit the West Coast docks, they're transferred to American rail. So I hear arguments about consumer and passenger rail being impossible, that Americans can't deal with it, we can't make it profitable, we can't make it work. Well, this was about 35, 40 years ago when there was a major crisis with the internal freight system on rail in this country. And aside from it could have been nationalized, and there was talk of nationalizing it, and believe it or not, there was a time when it was. Does anybody remember Conrail? Okay, that was a nationalized freight system. Does Conrail still exist? No. Why? Okay, they had time to reorganize and find these levels and scales of businesses where it could be re-privatized into the Union Pacific and all the other rails now that run throughout the country. But the problem was that the freight system was so broken down and the capital improvements needed were so bad that no private industry would touch it. And that's when everything started reverting to overland truck services and freight services, and this was, for a long time, that's all we saw were tractor trailers and semis on the road. Well, you're now even seeing consumer advertising on TV about how efficient American rail systems are. That it's something like, I couldn't believe some of the figures that were on TV, that how many gallons of gas it was costing to move so many tons of freight. It couldn't be beat by anything. So we've brought the rail system for cargo to the point of the highest efficiencies in the world, even better than the Swiss for our freight. So is it impossible to do that, to move people around? No, it's not impossible. If we put our minds to it as Americans, we'll make it happen. If it's important to us, we'll find a way to make it happen. But I guarantee you right now, the infrastructure for it in this country is so bad, I can't imagine any private entity picking it up to get it going. So it probably will be very similar to Conrail, where we as a people have to decide how important it is to us that we have that available, as air travel is getting quite expensive, and I'm not sure I really like being strip searched. I'd certainly like to get rid of the Gestapo we have at the airports right now. So there may be a room for it, and if we decide to do it, I think we can make it work. So should it be nationalized, should it be private, should it be public? It's a ridiculous question at this point, because I don't think you're going to find enough capital formation to get it private from the get-go. It's that bad. So is Washington doing a great job with Amtrak? Absolutely not. Are some local and regional rail systems operating fairly well? They actually are. Boston public rail systems are amazing. Chicago, Alex mentioned. Los Angeles, there's some really great examples of this that we can build on. So yeah, I'm not going to stand here as a Green Party person and tell you that I'm in favor of the U.S. government taking over all the things that should be private. But I do think it's a good way that if we have effective leadership and we have effective people in Washington that can get together and figure out how to get this stuff going. And sometimes it does take some leadership from your government who represents you, hopefully, please, hopefully, represents the people's will. That's what we're after. So we can get into the nits and bits and pieces of it right now, and we'll never get anywhere. But if we decide that's important, I know for sure we can do it. We've done it through a lot of other situations. Does it start with a government-sponsored? Maybe. In its present state, is it any good? Heck no. So that's where we are. Would you like to say anything on that, Kevin?
I like Amtrak. I was on it this week. It's fast, it's clean, it's relatively cheap, and for someone who has spent far too much of his life cramped up in, Road 97 eating the free peanuts and a Diet Coke and an airplane flying someplace, it's luxury travel with the cheapest of coach fares.
And Wi-Fi.
But I need to ask a question of the audience. Is there anyone here who understands that as a people, we have to make choices how we spend the people's money now? Raise your hand if you think we have to make choices. Okay, raise your hand if you think we don't need to have a budget and we do not need to make choices. Okay, everyone sees we have to make choices. The federal government spends 40 cents. 40 cents of every dollar the federal government spends is borrowed money, some from the Chinese, some from the Chinese.
Not anymore.
And
they won't buy it.
Our unfunded liabilities, meaning the cotton candy promises of the professional politicians, if you total those up, equal more than the total output of wealth by every person on the planet. This is what happens when Washington doesn't have a shopping list, when they don't set priorities, they don't make wise choices. We have far too many bases around the world. We are overextended. We need to shorten our lines. That's a good military tactic. It's necessary. But the challenges that face us as a people, if we meet them, we can still have an America for our grandchildren. And if we fail to meet them, read your history books. Read what happens when a central government collapses into bankruptcy. You don't drive to the store. You don't go to the movies on Saturday. You don't call the pizza place to have pizza delivered. The entire fabric of society breaks apart. Zimbabwe, which was once the breadbasket of Africa below the equator, had one of the higher standards of living in Africa south of the Sahara. In 20 years after its financial collapse, four world-class hospitals are now down to 3 that are empty hulks, stripped out, and 1 that operates but without supplies. See, when the financial side of an economy, the core of the economy, collapses, in Zimbabwe, the lifespan began to retreat. The average lifespan 20 years ago was 61 or 62. Now it's 41 or 42. That's in 20 years I've gone backwards. Read your history. We are not immune. Now we can either chart our own course and make a shopping list of what's essential to us as a people, or we can go until one day the money has no value, there is no banking system, there's chaos in the streets, and Tom Carper is still talking about wind turbines offshore. I like Amtrak, but Amtrak needs to find a way to cut those losses. I mean, if you can help me find equivalent reductions in the size of the federal government, we can push some money over to Amtrak, but you've got to reduce the size of the losses because we have a shopping list. God bless you. I appreciate the railroad, but we have choices to make.
What country in the world has a private, profit-making railroad system for passengers?
Passengers only?
Yeah.
None.
Right.
They're all subsidized through fuel taxes.
And everything that Andy mentioned about systems around the country, they're all government, not private profit-making. You can't make money when you pay.
Well, there's an answer there. There's an answer there. I mean, do we make choices between moving passengers or supporting Social Security and Medicare? Do we make choices between moving passengers and fitting out our troops with body armor and the plasma and the blankets?
Hold on, can I get it?
I mean, we have choices to make.
Okay.
Where is your favorite point to cut is a matter of personal choice, but the fact is we have to cut every place.
You made a false dichotomy between Social Security and the railroad. I'm throwing out another option.
We have to cut every place, and we need to have a shopping list.
Bernie, let's get on the next.
Go ahead.
You originally had the floor.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Bernard August. I'm a candidate for Green Party for the U.S. House. I am also an occupier there for 60 years. But I've heard some things that I found very disturbing. First of all, I'm very familiar with the post office The reason why the post office is bleeding money is because their businesses fell off. And their pensions have been robbed. And that's why the post office is hurting, because it was partially privatized, and the money, just like Social Security, was being ripped off to feed some other government program. That is why we have a problem with the post office. 2, Amtrak has been extremely underfunded for the last 15 years. When we had private-owned railroads, we had the Pennsylvania, we had all these Reading railroads, all these railroads, they did not keep them up or update. They let them collapse, and we, as usual, got stuck with the bill. My father worked for Pennsylvania Railroad and lost his job. So let's get some straight. Now, also, too, is what I don't like what I hear here from some of the candidates, is the fact of it is, and the people sitting in this audience, who pays for your highways? Who pays for that? We all do. So it's just a matter of misplaced priorities. You want to sit in a traffic jam and breathe polluted air, have wars over oil, or you want to get some decent mass transportation where we can all get around, get into some better social planning, and start talking to each other. Okay, that's another question. Okay, my question is this. I'm campaigning too.
Well, campaign at somebody else's.
Excuse me here. I'm just asking these people about a question which I have to answer myself. My question is, do you find your freedom of speech is because of what has happened with Julian Assange, a traitor? What about freedom of the press in this country? And open government and information? What are you going to do about this?
About Julian Assange?
About the freedom of information and the government secrecy and all of this tyranny that's going on. Your First Amendment rights to congregate.
All right, thanks. I'm going to touch on that because I didn't get a touch on that, and then we'll come right to your point. The railroads, real big thing with me. Family grew up with it, very similar. My father was actually in the trucking business as well, in the transportation. And everybody heard a lot of countries, heard a lot of ideas, and Andrew hit them on the freight. Really, really important. Our freight right now in this country is growing by rail like we can't imagine. The money that's getting poured into depot, I don't know if anybody's heard of the Harrisburg Depot. They're expanding every year by twice. That's all containers, or you want to call them cargoes. That's moving over. Really big thing, the Amtrak thing, the problem why we have this, and we talked about the other countries, he's stealing paper from me. Look at that. I'm billing you for that. It is pretty important because America is huge. Let's get real. It's huge, and to put a centralized rail system in is a great thing when we didn't have the planes. We didn't have the way to get over, but I don't know if anybody knows how long it takes from Amtrak from one coast to the other. You got to spend a night in New Orleans, or you got to spend a night in Chicago, and it's 4 days. So to try to keep this global system on this passenger thing, it needs to be regionalized, and the privatizing I've talked about, yes, they tried it, they worked, but we're now reverting back to moving things through. New York and the New Jersey system is a privatized system with freight and passengers. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. They used to barge over the cargo to New York City. They now have one operating barge to do this. They're expanding tremendously to put more barges online to move the freight over, because as we've shifted from the exciting, I don't know if everybody heard of this long-haul trucking. Anybody ever heard of that? It doesn't exist anymore. To find a long-haul trucker to drive something across country is like a stockbroker. You can't find them. Okay? So we've changed as a country, we've changed over, and we've done things differently, and we're going to continue that. To invest in our infrastructure, we need to do things to say, this is how we're going to do it. We need to do the research, find out if the short term makes sense, the long term makes sense, or put an exit strategy in place. Amtrak makes sense regionally, it really does. And it can be profitable. When you try to do the whole country, it's a big country. The other country you guys mentioned, like I said earlier, small. I just wanted to put my 2 cents on that one, since you guys still know. I'm going to answer his question. Steal, you got me last time. That's all right. It's all paper, too. On the freedom of information, it's a dangerous thing. It is a dangerous thing when we start putting conditions on that. Do I believe by taking secrets of another country and selling them or not selling them, putting them out in a situation is appallable. Okay, there are secrets for reasons. We are our government. I agree with you wholeheartedly. We should know everything, but guys, we can't be trusted with everything because we can't control other lives that we don't know about. And there are lives that are behind it. I have great people in the military that I know, and I don't want them to tell me what they know. I truly don't. I want them to do their job and protect us. And if that information's out, Jonathan back over there from the News Journal in the back room, if he gets dumped a bunch of stuff, I hope him and his editors, because I worked for the Los Angeles Times, I know, put the filter on. It makes sense to protect other people. Should we know about abuses? And should we? Absolutely. Different style of reporting, different thing. But just to open it all up, very, very dangerous, and I think that's very scary. My 2 cents.
Can I mention one thing? Because we promised a lot of people that we would be punctual because people are connecting with the people, getting rides back and so forth. I just wanted you to look at the clock for just a second. It's pushing 25 minutes up. The candidates have at the very end between 4 and 5 minutes to wrap up. So working backwards, we have about 7 minutes of questions, and then we're going to let them use their time as they wish. That was part of the incentive of starting with just 2 minutes. So we have about 7 minutes to get your questions. I want the gentleman with the red hat, please. Yes, right there for you, sir.
Yes.
The Phillies hat, I apologize.
I can be heard pretty well, I think. Geez, almost everything I've heard up here has been the same thing I've been hearing from Democrats and Republicans, all about we've got problems with debt, problems with the inefficiency of government, but very little about the siphoning of wealth and power, political power, in one direction in this country for the last 30 years. That is, out of the hands of the people in the bottom half of income and up into the hands of the people in the 1% income. It's going to the powerful corporations, the powerful bankers. The executive compensation is through the roof. These people have garnered a huge share of the wealth of this country, and they've dominated the political discourse and the economic debate, so that all the discussions about how to give them more and more and more, and to reduce what goes down to the rest of the people, and to paralyze government, to make sure government can't regulate what they're doing, or bring some sense or meaning to what they're doing, and to protect the interest of the rest of the people. That's all I hear when I hear about this. We've got to strip government of all its powers. It means government must not have the power to protect the people. Government must only protect the 1%. Now, what are you going to do about this policy, this inequality of wealth and power in this country? That's one I want to know about.
Let's start here and go this way.
Someone mentioned the Reading Railroad. Who mentioned the Reading Railroad? Very good. And the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Reading Railroad at one time was the most highly valued company on the planet. The Reading Railroad. It was the Google of its day. It was the Facebook of its day. It was the Microsoft of its day. Let me finish my answer. I listen respectfully to you.
Go ahead. With due respect, answer my question. I will. He's going on.
The Reading Railroad doesn't exist anymore. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Pennsylvania Railroad was the most highly valued corporation in the world. It had advanced beyond the Reading Railroad. If you moved goods or services or people, it was on the Pennsylvania Railroad. They had the lines. Who could compete? They already built the rail. They had the right of way. It was a rigged game. See, the 1% were always going to control things. But in the 1960s, the Pennsylvania Railroad couldn't pay its debts anymore. No one wanted to invest anymore. Technology had passed it by. It doesn't exist. We have a nation where people move between income groups. If you're in the lower 15% today, you're likely to be in the next level up in 10 years. If you're in the next level up, there's a chance you could bubble down. It's constantly bubbling up and bubbling down. I grew up under harsh circumstances in a factory town. I went to work in a steel mill 3 days after high school. And that's work, my friend.
Yeah, I worked 31 years in an automobile plant. I've worked.
Okay. Now, the point is, if I didn't like the deal I was getting, I packed my bags and went down the road. That's America. You make a choice. You follow your own road. I want to recognize Ben Mobley, who just walked in. Best-looking guy in the room. The inequities and the injustices imposed on the people by the federal government itself by listening in on phone conversations, by telling Roman Catholics that certain key elements in their core faith are not acceptable, by having drones fly overhead, by placing an order for 450 million rounds of 9mm hollow point, by frisking us in the airports, by using the Federal Reserve to prop up the New York banks, and no one pays the price except those of us in the room. I tell you, the problem isn't the Reading Railroad, and it's not the Pennsylvania Railroad. The problem today is the federal government itself, and that's why we have elections.
Okay. Kevin's not completely right and not completely wrong. I think we need to realize the world we're living in and the world we've lived in. Kevin makes a lot of very sound points. I hope many ears are still open here, because I think there's a few of us that have something that you should listen to as well. Government's too big. Government's in our lives too much. Absolutely. However, how did it get that way? You know, we're real good at identifying problems, but we don't always trace them back to where they start. Government is in the pockets of very large multinational corporations. Now, how did we get there? We got there because of us being Americans, opportunists. And if the law allowed it, you could finance a politician, finance a political party, finance a lot of things, lobbyists on K Street, etc. If you don't think that's happening, I don't know what country you live in. It's in the press all the time. I'm not saying I have an answer to what to do about it, but I don't want to lay it all at the feet of the government. We have corporations that are supranational now. I worked for a corporation that is located in this country, and the way they avoided their due taxes was to not allow the United States division of the corporation that I worked in, and I wasn't a peon, I was up in the executive department of the company, so I knew what was going on in the financial end. They would capture all the profits by selling the products that we had to sell in this country as the USA entity, but keeping all the profits in Hong Kong or China. It's easy. It's called a transfer cost. You set up different holding companies, and this has happened every day. So you talk about shipping our jobs overseas. We know that's happening. Nobody can deny that. But also, some of our lifeblood in this country, even with our own American companies, which are now not American companies, they're transnational. So there is some culpability between the two of them. We have the Tea Party, which is very focused on large government and excesses in government spending and government intrusion into their lives. And that's all valid, and that's all real, and it's only half the story. Our government is bought and paid for. It is right now, when you look at the massive amounts of money that are being spent on the two political parties. And that's all you've got. You've got two choices. Because you hear from libertarians, or you hear from Green Party people, or you hear from the Working Party people, or you hear from those small groups and small fringe elements. Well, my friends, we're the canaries in the coal mine. We're little, and we're insignificant, and we're squawking our heads off because it's poisonous out there. And if you don't do something and raise up and learn what's going on and not put the blinders on and just look at one side of the issue, you're going to miss it, and it's going to hit you right in the head. All right? I've lived in a lot of countries in this world. I'm born and raised in Delaware. My eyes are wide open. I've worked in businesses here. I've run factories in this country. I've run factories overseas. I've worked with unions. I've worked in the executive corners and branches of the largest corporations and Fortune 500 companies in this country. And I have no reason to lie to you. And I have no reason to pander to you. I haven't put up $10,000 to win this or even to compete in this election. I'm here to tell you the truth. And I'm glad you're out here for your selected candidate. That's a wonderful thing. And I'm glad you're here to support the process. I wish this room were packed full of people. But here we are. And that's all we can do. Alex and I, and Kevin and Keith, is tell you as best we can what we're seeing and what we need to change, and we're all good people. The only people that aren't the good people are the people who aren't here.
See if I can answer your question.
It's a very good close.
One.
Shot my water early.
Capital gains at 15%. That's what the wealthy live off of. They pay 15% at best. As you know, I'm trying to say this fairly. I'm neither all that much in love with Obama, and I'm not that much in love with Romney. So I'm just saying this as a neutral person, if I can. Romney admits at best he paid 13%. He's a wealthy person. I'm pretty wealthy myself. I don't think I paid much more. People who are wealthy want to pay the minimum amount of taxes. I've had some years I don't pay any because I have losses. Is it fair? No, it's not fair at all. The maximum tax is 39%. Nobody pays it. You know that. There are exemptions for everything. So if you want a system that's a little fairer, let's have tax laws a little fairer for everybody. There are, as Buffett says, everybody would pay more if everybody pays more. No one voluntarily wants to. Number two, I think we need term limits. We have 37 states that have 37 states that have term limits for governors, and all the other states are thinking about it. We need term limits for our senators and our congressmen because the power is so huge that when they're not in, they don't want to do anything. When the Republicans are out, they can't wait to be back in because they're powerless. They build up, some of our senators are around 40, 50 years. It's crazy. We have a couple of senators in their 80s. They shouldn't be there. What about the younger people? We need term limits badly, so that would change everything. And I think we also need term limits for our Supreme Court. To be honest with you, what are we having people who stick around 30, 40 years? They're completely out of touch with America, if you ask me. I think that's a mistake. We're always changing our Constitution. Our Constitution has changed so dramatically that if you looked at our original Constitution we have now, it's not the same. And third is, and I want to be fair, Delaware is generally rated the fourth most corrupt state in the Union. I think it's the most corrupt state. I think the reason it's not rated number one is Delaware paid off some people so it could be rated lower. I mean, corporate America is here. Corporate America here is very abusive. You know that. Why do you think they're here for? Because we have no usury laws. We charge our own people through payday loans. We rip off our own people, our poorer people. We abuse our poor people. Our poorer whites, our poorer blacks, our poorer Hispanics. We abuse them at 35 and 36%. It's unconscionable. We're more moral people. So let's blame ourselves. We're here in the most corrupt state. I've said this, and I'm going to say this again. I think Senator Copper is the most corrupt politician in the history of Delaware. When you compare him to Senator Williams, who was a saint, who refused to the corruption. If you go down to Millsboro and see where he lives, his house and his style is what that man was. Uncorruptible. And when they said, well, you don't have any friends in the Senate, he said, what do I need friends for? I'm here to pass laws. What we have today is corruption at that level. And I know this is all being tape recorded. So Tom, when you're out there, I think you're the most corrupt senator in the history of the country. Thank you. And this is our last question, by the way, because we're going to wrap up. You left leave at 8. So he gets the floor, and then we'll do questions, please. I mean, statements.
Let me ask you a question. Let me answer your question.
I get that.
Why is the 1% so strong? Is that summarizing pretty good?
Good enough.
Okay. Because multiple factions. Number one, we all want to be the 1%. So our whole American dream is based on wanting to reach there. So we will do a lot of things and overlook a lot of things because we all want to be there, from a lottery ticket to innovation to whatever it is. We all want to be there, so we let them get away with too much. Second part of that is it's called lobbyists. Because these people have the money and can fund lobbyists to do their desires, their thoughts, their creations, and they can pay off, like somebody else mentioned, politicians. This gentleman, $2.4 million in his bank. I haven't seen the son of it. Maybe somebody else has. I don't know. I haven't seen him spend a dime. How did he get that money? It's not from, I deal with people that I meet and deal with that try to give me nickels and dimes because they're hurting so bad, and I won't even take them. I'm willing to do what I have to do to get out here and talk to people. But because of those lobbyists and those special interests, they can control how everything else functions, and they are smarter by understanding it. And it is our time talking about term limits, Alex mentioned, and I know it's exciting. I'm not going to trash my new friend Alex here, but I do want to say to you, term limits, we have them. You know what they are? They're elections. Get out there, vote them out, vote them in. It's very simple. They're doing a job for you, doing a job for us. Whether it's Tom Carper or somebody else as incumbent, if they're not getting it done, if your Medicare is not solved, your Social Security, your Amtrak issue, he's not getting it done, don't give him another 6 years, don't give him another 2 years. It's just that simple. We need to restructure how we do things, but if we are tied to people that fund us, we're only going to listen to them. We may cut ribbons. Mr. Carper, I don't know if the camera's full on, excellent ribbon cutter. I got to give it to him. Cuts more ribbons than I know how to do it. I got to give him props on that one. But you know what? I want solutions, and that's why I decided, as I think one of them mentioned, $10,000. I had to put it up. I saved up for it. I looked at this in 2010, and I sold my businesses off a year ago to do everything so I could dedicate myself to this, and I won't accept those 1% tell me how I should vote or how I should look at it. And that's my biggest fear. When I beat Tom Carter September 11th, September 12th, and they all come crashing down my door, tell me who to hire and who to deal with my staff, and to do all that, how to listen, how to run this great campaign with millions of dollars come flowing in, that I have the strength to say, no, go away. Because I'm here for the people. And I think that's what all of us, and I know we need to do. Because till you have that, till you have, as the senator he was talking about, have that understanding, it's not about friendship, it's not about social clubs, it's not about a celebrity. I had somebody come up to me and ask me for an autograph. I said, what for? I don't understand. I'm here to represent you, to make sure you get the best deal possible. And to tell the 1%ers, you're nobody else, you're just like everybody else. Stand in line, let's talk, I'll listen to you, but you know what? I'm not listening to you because you have more money. That's all I can say on that one. I hope that answers your question.
Let's do this because you've been patient. There's 10 minutes left, and I'm going to pass on my closing statement and just say thank you very, very much for coming, because I know people have commitments. Thank you. These two gentlemen still have some time, and he has some time. You guys go ahead.
I'll keep mine short, because I think that was my last statement, was a closing statement. And I just want to leave you with one thought. When I was dealing with suppliers, and I was dealing with a lot of different people in business, and I had a choice. I'm buying literally millions and millions and millions of square feet of leather. I'm buying cloth, all kinds of different things for the ready-wear industry. And I had large vendors and small vendors and all kinds of different kind of businesses I dealt with. Well, I found that most of the companies I worked for always dealt with the large vendors, the Republicans and the Democrats, to use the metaphor. And I always found that, yeah, they could be very reliable, and they've done things the way they've done in a long time. But I also found that the small guys sometimes had their really breakthrough stuff and had new ideas and had different ways of approaching the market and weren't so entrenched in their positions and didn't have the kind of external pressures from large organizations to act in a certain way. And so every now and then, I'd take a chance on a small guy because I saw that there was something else going on there, that there were some new ideas, and that I really wasn't making any progress with the old guys. You know, if there's anything wrong with my sales rep, great guy, all represent the country and the companies, really nice guys. Everybody's great. That's the nice thing. One thing about international business, I've met so many wonderful people throughout this world. But there are differences. And if you want your country to go a certain way, if you like the way things are going, if the status quo is working for you, stick with what you got. I don't think things are working right now so well. We need new people. You've got 4 choices here. Half of them represent something you haven't seen before and maybe hadn't considered before. Like Mr. Peary's and I represent a different way of thinking, very similar in a lot of our ideas. We come things from different angles, and I would just ask you to consider that. And I want to thank you for coming out tonight and encourage friends. We'll have some, I imagine we're going to have a bunch more of these throughout the state, and encourage others to come out. Because it's not only our voices that are important, it's also yours. Your probative questions, you pushing for change, and asking the hard questions. And I want to thank you all for coming out and participating.
Well, let me wrap up here. The classic technique that the two parties use is to divide one from another. Each party, in their own way, will tell you they're protecting you from the bad people over there. This is what they've been doing for a long time. This is how they maintain power. In fact, it's not so much a difference in Washington between R's and D's. The real differences you find politically are between the incumbents and the challengers. Our problems are not with each other. Our problems are not with your neighbor down the street who's a Republican, or the person across the cul-de-sac who's a Democrat, or someone who doesn't vote too much and never got registered. Your problems aren't with your neighbors, and they're not with the people you work with. And our problems aren't really, Amtrak. That's a smallish thing in the global. But our problems are with Washington. The tax code is 60,000 pages. No one here in this room understands it. Tom Carper doesn't understand it. But the tax code acts as a giant juicing machine for donations. You see, you can threaten to apply a new tax to peach growers in southern Indiana, and suddenly, if you're an incumbent, you will have fundraisers to donate money to your reelection campaign. And the threat of that new tax on peach growers in southern Indiana goes away. You know that we actually have an administration in power today that talks much about social justice. That's one of their key points, and that's part of the American discussion. Let's have that. But under their watch, General Electric made $5 billion in profits in the United States, and because of the tax code, paid $0 corporate tax. See, the ones who are having the wool pulled over our eyes are all of us. Tom Carper, his primary speaking point in Delaware this summer is we need a national park. I hear about foreclosures. I hear about adult children moving back home. I hear about families being pulled apart by the corrosive effects of long-term unemployment and what it does to a man and a woman. And Tom Carper, in his world of Washington, in his world of the Beltway universe, believes that the number one issue before the people of Delaware is a national park. Things won't change until we change the people in Washington. Our problems are not found in the small differences here in this room. Our problems are found by career politicians who care for nothing more than their own cynical reelection. God bless all of you, and God save the United States of America.
And, whether it's one or it's 1,000, it doesn't matter. You came out and pat yourselves on the back, give yourselves a round of applause. Really.
Yeah.
What I'd also like to do is I'd like to thank these other three gentlemen here, because I'm not a politician. I call myself a statesman, and I'll explain that in a second. But I want to give these three a round of applause, because doing this is, to me, an eye-opening experience. I know Kevin's done a couple of things, but to my knowledge, this is a wild thing when you get the microscope and you get the questions and you get grilled. It's like you want to kill everybody and things like that. That's not what it's about. We're trying to help. We're really saying, you know what? I think we can do it a little fairer. At least that's my belief, and I want to thank every one of these three gentlemen for doing it, going forward, and being able to do this. So I really want to give you guys a round of applause. Most importantly, though, Kevin kind of hit that on the head, the partisan divide. When I set this up and we looked at it, and I said, okay, I saved for it, I put my pennies away, and I said, we're going to do this, and we're going to set some serious rules. And I had people come in to me, said they believed me, and I tested them, and they didn't, and they were gone. But half of my committee, half of my staff is Republicans. I'm not a politician. And as I said that earlier, I'm a statesman. I believe we need to take care of our union first, our people, our country, our government. We need to make sure that's first. The party is way down on my list. I sat down with the party. I told them that. Of course, they laughed at me and told me a bunch of other stuff that I won't repeat. Somebody's brought up some of it. I won't mention who. But anyway, and really importantly to know that it's all about solving it. I think I mentioned earlier, I'm not here looking for an ego trip. I'm not here looking for what you call it. I have put others above my personal goals for my entire companies, my entire life. It's just what I do. My wife says it's a little bit of a disease, but whatever. I just do that, and everybody said this is a great fit for me, and I truly believe it, that I can go out and help. But the one thing that I need you to do is not only just come to these things, but two other main things is be spoken. Newsreels in the back. Tell them. I've challenged Tom Carper several times to debate. Did it Saturday at the Peach Festival. No response. He's an icon. Is the icon helping you? I can't see it. Kevin hit some of the points. I'm not going to highlight them again because they're all real. But I can tell you, write to Newslearner, call him, talk to Jonathan in the back, say, where is Tom? Why can't he talk? The four of us, to one of us. I'm running against him September 11th, 21 days from now. Second thing I'm going to ask you to do is not only just reach out and talk, but spread the word. You have an opportunity to take Tom Carper and put him into retirement, thank him for his years of service, and it's time to move on. Because once that happens September 11th, it's going to be the same situation until November 6th. So really importantly, I have a little self-interest on September 11th, 21 days away. We have the opportunity to speak. So not only just talk about it among yourselves, spread the word. Talk. It's the most powerful thing you guys have. Really it is. Your voice and your beliefs. Whether you like me or you don't like me, but I'm the first one in the line of fire. These guys all have November 6th. I'm not going to jealousize them or anything like that, but pretty important. I do want to completely thank you all for coming out again. I really appreciate it.
Bring the gentlemen to victory. There you go. Well done. Thanks for that.
I'm doing
Get that, Jimmy? Yeah.
And I want to recognize Mr. Ben Mobley, the Republican candidate for Insurance Commissioner of the state.